Today, I'm going to be following up on a video I put out a little while ago where I spoke about how I record audio at weddings. Now, if you haven't seen that, I recommend you go watch it first and then come back to this video. Now, a lot of you asked me for my detailed audio settings, but to be honest, I don't do anything that profound. Most of my audio adjustments come in post. But with that said, I'll still go through each audio device mentioned in the previous video and show you my settings. Now to clarify, I won't be going through every setting, just the ones that are applicable to audio. Then I'll hop into my video editing program and show you how I use a channel EQ to make my vocal recordings sound crisp and brighter. Let's go through my gear, starting with the Tascam DR10L and DR10X. The first setting you should see is mic gain. I just ignore this because I turn on the auto level setting, which acts as a built-in compressor. In layman terms, a compressor automatically raises the quiet parts and lowers the loud parts of the recording, making a manual mic gain setting obsolete. The next setting is the low cut filter, which I leave off. A low cut filter, also known as a high pass filter, helps remove unwanted sounds that fall in lower frequencies such as breathing or shirt rustling. Although this sounds like a good thing, according to the Tascam manual, the cutoff frequency is 120 Hz and the typical male adult voice range is usually 85 to 155 Hz, meaning their voice could possibly be cut off from 120 Hz and below. It's better to have the full frequency range and then use a low cut filter in post. Next is the limiter. This helps but does not completely prevent audio from peaking, and I turn this on in only the DR10L. This is because I'm only recording people speaking and it's much easier to limit audio peaks in speech. However, with the DR10X, I'm recording out of a speaker which always seems to be blown out even if I turn the limiter on. This is why I connect the attenuator, which lets me reduce the incoming sound from the speaker by up to 25 decibels. I'll usually set mine to -20 decibels. The last couple of settings that are only found in the DR10L is bit depth and FS sample. I set the bit depth to 24-bit because that will give me the highest sounding audio quality and the FS sample to 48 kHz. For the Sony TX660, under scene select, I leave that off. As I mentioned earlier, most of what I do is done in post, so I prefer to have audio as unfiltered as I can. Under record mode, I'm recording at the highest level, which is 44.1 kHz at 16-bit. Under mic sensitivity, I'll leave it on auto. This is basically Sony's version of its own built-in compressor. I leave stereo emphasis off, partially because I don't really understand the meaning behind Sony's definition. Lastly, we have a low cut filter, which I leave off for the same reasons as the DR10L and X. For the Rode Wireless Go 2, all the audio settings are configured in the Rode Central app. Full disclosure, I hardly ever use the receiver because the transmitters have internal storage that recordings are saved to, and they sound really good in my opinion. But for the times I do use the receiver, here are my settings. First, I'm going to change the gain mode to camera and then set the preset to whatever camera I'm using. In my case, it's either the A7S III or FX3. Under mode, I'll set it to merge, and that will allow me to turn on a safety channel recording. Now, the transmitter has two sets of settings. The first is centered around the recordings, and the second is centered around exporting the recordings. So under the transmitter, which is the actual recorder that goes on my talent, I'll set the record mode to always. So I never have the thought of, did I press record? Because the receiver's gain mode is set to mimic my camera, the passive attenuation device, also known as pad, won't work on the transmitter. However, there is no harm in leaving it on, so I just leave it on. Under recording, I want that to be uncompressed broadcast quality. Now, the second set of settings are done when I export the files from the transmitter onto my computer. After finding the files, I'll set the format to WAV, the sample rate to 48 kHz, and bit depth to 24. There is a 32-bit float option, but that's actually not true 32-bit float. It's just an upscale 24-bit file. Plus, it's a bigger file size, so I don't really see the need to use that. If you know something that I don't, please let me know in the comments. And lastly, I'll leave the loudness option off, as I can always adjust this in post using a limiter. Now my Zoom H5 is a bit more intricate as it's packed to the brim with settings, even though it is an older recorder. So firstly, under record mode, I want to make sure it's set to stereo file and not multi-file. This will change the first setting from project to file list. I'm showing this just in case you're following along and are confused because you're seeing project instead of file list. Now you know why. There's also an important reason as to why I use stereo file, but I'll get into that in a bit. So if we go back to the top of the menu in the Zoom H5, I'll ignore file list and folder because they have nothing to do with audio, and go into input and output settings. For my purposes, I really only care about input 1 and 2 as I never record using the left and right inputs. But in the event that I do use the left and right inputs, I'll go into all, I'll turn off the low cut filter. So again, I could apply my own low cut in post. In compressor limiter settings under all, I'll use compressor 2, vocal. Although I can add a compressor in post, I actually like how my recordings sound with the built-in one turned on. Input 1 and 2 phantom don't apply to me because I'm not using the H5 to power a boom mic, but plug-in power does. I'll make sure I have it turned on because I don't like to rely on the AA batteries it takes. I'd rather plug it into an outlet. Under input 1 and 2 pad, I go into all and turn it off. This is the H5's built-in attenuator and it will reduce the input signal level by 20 decibels. Of course, on this recorder, I can monitor the audio and adjust the levels manually as I like. So it doesn't really serve my purpose. If I were to run into a DJ that didn't really know their stuff and the line out was coming in hot and noisy, then maybe using this function would help. But hopefully that never happens. MS Matrix and ROM monitor I leave alone because to my knowledge, that has more to do with musical instruments, but I will turn on mono mix because that will allow me to hear audio in both the left and right channels during playback. For example, if you ever recorded a speech and then went home and listened to it only to discover you're only hearing that speech in your left earphone, you would have to fix that in post by doing a channel balance. But with mono mix turned on, if that same situation happened, the H5 would balance the channel for me so I don't have to do that in post. And to wrap up this submenu, line out level is set to 0, giving me the most accurate sound when monitoring my levels. Next, I'll come back out to the main menu and go into the recording submenu. The only thing I'm setting here is the record format, and I'm setting it to wave 96 kilohertz at 24-bit. Now, the reason I set record mode to stereo file is it puts the H5 into a singular recording mode instead of a multi-track one. And since I'm just recording one source of audio using the H5, a singular recording mode is all I need. Because this is a multi-track recorder, I could record out of a DJ's mixer and from a microphone receiver, and that would create separate audio tracks, one for each recorded source. Although this might seem convenient, I don't recommend it because if something were to happen to the H5, I would lose both sources. I'd rather invest in another physical recorder and use it to record a completely separate source. I use Final Cut Pro for editing, so that's where I'll do my audio edits for vocals. The main thing I want to show you guys is how I use a channel EQ. Now, a channel EQ is a tool used to manipulate different frequencies and sounds to make them sound better and to potentially get rid of background noise. A channel EQ is one of, if not the most common editing tool, so don't worry if you're not using Final Cut Pro. It'll also be available in Premiere Pro and DaVinci Resolve.
When I think of Jazz, she is the best person I know. She's kind and caring, and I think about life before Jazz, which was fine. It was great, enjoyed it.
So here I have a clip. You probably have seen this guy if you've watched one of my latest next day, same day edits. He's in it. I have his main clip here out of my camera, and then I have the audio file right here. This is the Tascam DR10L. What I want to do is I want to add some sort of voice isolation. So in Final Cut, they have their own built-in voice isolation. I'm just going to go ahead and turn that on first, give it at 20%. That's good with me. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add my own compressor. So I'm going to type in compressor in the effects and find it, drag it in there. And then under the drop-down menu, I'll go into voice, and then I'll go into vocal compressor 2. And then the most important thing is the channel EQ. So I will type in channel and channel EQ will pop up. I will drag that in as well. And then it's very, very simple for me. There's actually a default that I use all the time, and this is it. So drop down, I will go into the last one, which it says EQ tools. I will go into hi-fi boost. I'll play this back.
When I think of Jazz, she is the best person I know. She's kind and caring.
With effects off.
You know, I think about life before Jazz, which was fine. It was great.
And back on.
Nothing wrong with it.
So you might have noticed that it got a little quieter there. So in order to bring back up his voice, I'm going to add a limiter. So I'll search that up. And then I'll just go ahead and play it. And then I'll go into the settings of the limiter. And then I will increase the limiter's gain.
You know, I think about life before Jazz, which was fine. It was great. Enjoyed it.
And then I will look at my, and I think this is pretty good. And I'll look at my levels, and I want it to be between -12 and -6 dB. So it's looking like it's hitting around -6. So that's good for me. So I'm going to leave it at that. And that's pretty much it. Those are my main audio correction settings. So I told you it wasn't anything profound, but you know, hopefully this will help you. But before we end this video, I want to show you guys just the setting in the channel EQ, right? So in this channel EQ, under this hi-fi boost, you know, preset, essentially, it's done two things. It's lowered the mid frequencies, and then it's raised the high frequencies. Now, I can even take this a step further if I wanted. So what I'll do is I will click on Analyzer and play this.
When I think of Jazz, she is the best person I know. She's kind and caring.
And you can notice,
you know, I think about life before.
like I said, with male voices, they usually start at 80 hertz and above. And if, you know, I keep playing this, you can notice nothing's really happening in his voice here. This line that represents where his voice is hitting on frequency is not really doing much, right? So what you can actually do is you can use this guy, which is a low cut or high pass filter, and you can drag this down, right? So the reason it's called, and what I'll do is I'll drag it up to 100, right? And that'll cut out more of the low ends of his voice. So you're cleaning up that low end. So any, like I said, shirt rustlings or just, you know, like that low frequency, that room noise, you're cutting it out essentially. And the reason it's called the low cut high pass filter is because you're cutting out the lows, right? Self-explanatory. But you're allowing the high frequencies to pass. So high pass filter, right? And then you could also do the same thing on this side. However, if I keep playing it,
When I think of Jazz,
so you can see past 8,000 frequencies, nothing's really going on. So you could also do that on this side as well.
Which was fine. It was great. Enjoyed it. Nothing wrong with it. But you know, I think it was down here.
That sounds pretty good to me.
Jazz, it's up here. She makes.
And if you, and you know, I'm just being nitpicky at this point. I might raise up these frequencies a little bit more.
She elevates it. She makes it.
And you know, the higher frequencies up here between 2,000 to 6,000, those are what make voices brighter and more crisp. So I think this is a really good spot for his vocals.
When I think of Jazz, she is the best person I know. She's kind and caring, and you know, I think about life before Jazz, which was fine. It was great. Enjoyed it. Nothing wrong with it, but you know, I think it was down here. And then with Jazz, it's up here. She makes the mundane seem exciting.
So hopefully you can leverage this video to help you with your audio productions. As usual, if there's any questions, leave them down in the comments below, and I will do my absolute best to respond. Like this video if it helped, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.